I never thought my own son, a doctor, would look me straight in the eye as I bled out on a hospital gurney and tell me with total coldness, "I would rather die than save a failure like you." Those were the exact words that came out of Daniel's mouth when the doctors asked him to donate blood to save my life. What he didn't know is that I had a hidden camera recording every second of his betrayal. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the notification bell because we post new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments which city and country you're watching from. My name is Michael Miller. I'm 68 years old, and for my entire life I believed I had raised my son right. I built a real estate empire from nothing, working 18-hour days for 40 years to give Daniel everything I never had. I paid for the best private schools in Chicago, a medical degree from a top university, and I even gifted him his first clinic when he graduated. I thought I had raised an honorable man, a doctor who understood the value of saving lives. How wrong I was. It all started on Tuesday, October 23rd, 2024 at 3 in the morning. I had been feeling strange for several days with abdominal pains that I initially blamed on my age. That night the pain became unbearable and I started vomiting blood. My neighbor David Rodriguez found me passed out in the hallway of my building in an upscale neighborhood and immediately called an ambulance. At University General Hospital, Dr. Robert Iglesias explained the severity of my situation. I had massive internal bleeding caused by ruptured esophageal varices, a complication I never knew I had. My blood pressure had dropped dangerously, and I needed an immediate transfusion of type O negative blood. The problem was that the hospital's blood bank had limited reserves of my blood type, and my condition was critical. "Mr. Miller, doctor," Iglesias told me with a grave voice, "we need to urgently contact compatible relatives. Your blood type is rare, and every minute counts." Nurse Linda Serrano had already called Daniel, who arrived at the hospital at exactly 5:15 in the morning. When I saw my son walk through the emergency room door, I felt a relief I can never describe. Daniel was 42 years old, a cardiovascular surgeon at a major clinical hospital, and he knew perfectly well that we shared the same blood type because he had donated for me years ago during a minor operation. I thought my nightmare was over. Dr. Iglesias approached Daniel and quickly explained the situation. "Dr. Miller, your father needs an urgent transfusion. You have the same blood type according to our records. Could you donate 400 milliliters? It's a matter of life and death." What happened next changed the image I had of my son forever. Daniel stared at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. It wasn't concern. It wasn't love. It was something much colder and more calculating. He remained silent for several seconds that felt like an eternity. "Dr. Miller," Dr. Iglesias insisted, "we need your answer immediately." Daniel took a deep breath and spoke the words that would be forever burned into my heart. "I'm not donating a single drop of my blood to save this failure. I would rather die than save a failure like you, Dad." The silence in the emergency room was deafening. Nurse Linda's jaw dropped. Dr. Iglesias couldn't believe what he had just heard. I felt as if a dagger had been plunged into my chest. The physical pain of the hemorrhage was nothing compared to the emotional pain of hearing those words from my own son. "But Dr. Iglesias stammered, "He's your father. He's dying." "Exactly," Daniel replied with a cruel smile I will never forget. "And the sooner he dies, the better for everyone, especially me." After Daniel uttered those devastating words, Dr. Iglesias had to urgently find other options to save my life. Fortunately, they managed to locate a compatible donor at a neighboring hospital, and the transfusion was successful. But the emotional damage was already done. My own son had preferred to see me die rather than lift a finger to help me. During the next 5 days, I remained hospitalized. I decided to pretend my condition was more serious than it really was. The doctors had stabilized me, but I feigned confusion, extreme weakness, and difficulty speaking coherently. I wanted to observe my family's behavior when they thought I was on the brink of death, or even worse, losing my mind. On Friday afternoon, while pretending to be asleep in my hospital bed, I overheard a conversation between Daniel and his wife Jessica that chilled me to the bone. They had tiptoed into my room, believing I was unconscious due to the medication. "Are you sure he can't hear us?" Jessica whispered nervously, glancing at my bed. "Completely," Daniel answered with total coldness. "The doctors said he's having episodes of severe confusion. Besides, they're giving him strong sedatives. He won't know a thing." What I heard next showed me that my son's cruelty had no limits. Jessica began talking about their plans for my future, as if I were a burden they needed to get rid of as soon as possible. "Daniel, we can't wait any longer," Jessica said in a calculating voice. "You have to speed up the process to get him into the St. Teresa's nursing home. The longer we wait, the greater the risk he might fully recover, and we could lose our chance." "I've already spoken to the director of the home," my son replied. "They can have him ready by next Wednesday. Once he's there, it'll be much easier to prove he isn't fit to manage his own affairs." Jessica moved closer to the bed, where I lay motionless, controlling my breathing, to seem completely oblivious to their conversation. "And what about the properties?" she asked in a very low voice. "The apartment building downtown, the house in Florida, and especially the main bank account. According to the lawyer, he has almost $800,000 in cash, not counting the investments." "Everything is planned," Daniel replied with a confidence that terrified me. "Once he's in the nursing home, we'll present the medical documentation I prepared with my colleague, Dr. Vasquez. We'll certify that he suffers from advanced senile dementia and can't make his own financial decisions. I'll be appointed his legal guardian automatically." "Are you absolutely sure it will work?" Jessica insisted. "We can't afford any mistakes." "If it's discovered that he's perfectly lucid—" "Don't worry," Daniel interrupted her. "I have 30 years of medical experience. I know exactly how to write a report that will be unquestionable. Besides, I've already spoken with Attorney Martinez. For $3,000, he'll handle all the legal paperwork without asking any uncomfortable questions." Jessica seemed to relax a bit, but she still had doubts. "And what if Sarah suspects something?" she asked, referring to my 16-year-old granddaughter. "You know she adores her grandfather. She's always been very close to him." "Sarah is a teenager," Daniel replied dismissively. "What can she do? Besides, once we have control of the finances, we can send her to study abroad. Far from here, far from trouble." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, during which I discovered horrifying details about their plans. They had been preparing this operation for months, waiting for the right moment. My health crisis had been the perfect opportunity they were looking for. Daniel revealed that he had enormous debts I knew nothing about. He had lost a medical malpractice lawsuit the previous year and had to pay a settlement of $320,000 to the family of a patient who had died due to his negligence. Furthermore, he had been investing in shady businesses that had resulted in catastrophic losses. "Without the old man's money, we're going to lose the house, the car, everything," Daniel admitted in desperation. "The Herrera family's lawyers aren't going to wait much longer. If we don't pay the settlement by the end of the year, they'll seize everything we own." Jessica nodded in understanding. "That's why it's so important to act fast. Once we have access to his accounts, we can pay off all the debts and start over." When they finally left, my mind was racing. In less than a week, I had discovered that my son had not only denied me the blood that could have saved my life, but he had also been plotting to steal everything I had worked for decades to build. But there was something Daniel and Jessica didn't know, something that would completely change the course of this story and turn the hunter into the hunted. What Daniel and Jessica were completely unaware of was that for the past 6 months, I had installed an audio recording system in several strategic places for a completely different reason. My downstairs neighbor had been stealing mail and packages from the building, and as the Homeowners Association president, I needed evidence to report him. I had placed small, voice-activated recording devices in the entryway in my home office, and curiously in my bedroom as well. When I returned home the following Monday, after being discharged from the hospital, the first thing I did was review all the recordings from the hospital. I had a portable device that I always carried in the inner pocket of my jacket, something I had bought on my lawyer's recommendation after some issues with difficult tenants in my rental properties. Listening to the recordings, I confirmed every venomous word my son had spoken. His brutal refusal to donate blood, his plans to fraudulently commit me, and the entire conspiracy to steal my estate were recorded with crystal clarity. But I needed more information before I could act. For the next few days, I continued to feign weakness and mental confusion whenever Daniel or Jessica visited. It was crucial that they believed their plan was working perfectly. Meanwhile, I discreetly contacted my trusted private investigator, Ethan Morales, who had worked for me in the past, resolving issues with problematic tenants and conducting background checks on business partners. "Mr. Miller," Ethan said during our secret meeting at a coffee shop downtown, "I need you to give me all the details you can about your son's financial activities. If he really has the debts you mentioned, he must have left a trail." I gave him all the information I had gathered: names of lawyers, approximate dates of the malpractice trial, and the fragments of conversation I had recorded. Ethan took meticulous notes and promised me results in 72 hours. While waiting for Ethan's report, I decided to investigate some particularly disturbing aspects on my own. I called my old friend Charles Evans, who had been the director of the city's medical board for 15 years before retiring. Charles had contacts throughout the entire healthcare sector. "Michael, what you're telling me is very strange," Charles said after hearing my story. "Daniel always had an impeccable reputation at the hospital. However, now that you mention it, there were rumors a few months ago about a complicated case at the San Carlos hospital, but the details were kept very quiet." Charles promised to make some discreet inquiries and find out what exactly had happened with my son's professional career. Meanwhile, I continued to play my role as a confused and vulnerable old man, something that became harder to bear with each passing day. On Thursday afternoon, Ethan called me with news that exceeded my worst expectations. We had arranged to meet in the park near the Crystal Palace, where we could talk without risk of being overheard. "Mr. Miller," Ethan began with a grave expression, "your son's situation is much worse than you imagined. I've gained access to court documents that show Daniel was sued not for one case of malpractice, but for 3 different cases between January and July of this year." Ethan's report revealed a terrifying reality. Daniel had been performing unnecessary surgeries on elderly patients, charging exorbitant fees for procedures they didn't need. The Herrera family, whom they had mentioned in their conversation, was not the only one affected. There were at least 6 other families who had filed civil and criminal lawsuits against my son. "According to my sources at the courthouse," Ethan continued, "the total settlements he has to pay amount to over $500,000. But there's something even worse. The district attorney's office is investigating possible charges of aggravated fraud and serious injury. He could face 5 to 8 years in prison if all the charges are proven." The information was overwhelming, but Ethan wasn't finished. He had discovered that Jessica, far from being an innocent victim of circumstances, had been an active accomplice in her husband's fraudulent schemes. As a lawyer specializing in healthcare law, she had helped draft deceptive contracts and had advised Daniel on how to avoid legal liability. "Your daughter-in-law has her own law firm, but it's on the verge of bankruptcy," Ethan explained. "She has been diverting money from client accounts to cover Daniel's legal defense costs. The Bar Association has already opened a disciplinary investigation against her." But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Ethan had discovered that Daniel and Jessica had been forging my signature on several documents over the past few months. They had tried to transfer ownership of my rental apartment in a trendy neighborhood to a shell company they controlled. Only the coincidental intervention of their lawyer, Mr. Fernando Aguirre, prevented the transfer from being completed, Ethan explained. Mr. Aguirre became suspicious when he saw that the signature didn't exactly match the samples he had on file and decided to postpone it until he could speak with you personally. Now I understood why Daniel and Jessica were so desperate to prove my mental incapacity. It wasn't just to access my money, but to legitimize all the forgeries they had already committed. If they managed to have me declared incompetent, they could argue that any irregularities in the documents were due to my deteriorating mental state. That night, alone in my apartment, I reviewed all the information I had gathered. I had recordings of their conspiratorial conversations, evidence of their massive debts, proof of document forgery, and testimonies from multiple victims of Daniel's fraudulent schemes. It was time to switch from defense to offense. With all the evidence I had gathered, it was time to consult with professionals who could help me use this information legally and effectively. On Friday morning, I requested an urgent appointment with my trusted lawyer, George Ferrer, who had handled all my legal affairs for the past 20 years. "Michael," George said, after meticulously reviewing all the documents I presented, "this is much more serious than I initially thought. We're not just talking about an attempt at family fraud, but an organized criminal network affecting multiple victims." George explained that the forgeries of my signature constituted document fraud, that the conspiracies to declare me incompetent represented attempted aggravated fraud, and that Daniel's fraudulent medical schemes could be classified as crimes against public health. Each of these charges carried significant prison sentences. "However," George continued, "we must proceed with extreme caution. Your son and daughter-in-law are professionals with influential contacts in the legal and medical systems. We need a strategy that is absolutely irrefutable." During our 3-hour meeting, we developed a meticulous plan that would attack on multiple fronts simultaneously. First, we would file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office for the document forgery crimes. Second, we would send all the evidence of medical fraud to the medical board and the state's health agency. Third, we would file a civil lawsuit to recover any money they had managed to fraudulently withdraw. "But there's something more important than all of this," George warned me. "We need to protect all your financial assets immediately. If Daniel and Jessica suspect you're investigating them, they might try to accelerate their plans or even destroy evidence." That same afternoon, accompanied by George, I visited all my banks to implement additional security measures. I changed all my passwords. I established that any transaction over $1,000 required my physical presence with 2 forms of identification, and I requested to be notified immediately of any attempt by third parties to access my accounts. At the downtown bank branch where I kept my main account, the manager, Mrs. Linda Thompson, informed me of something that left me cold. "Mr. Miller," Linda said with obvious concern, "2 weeks ago your son visited us accompanied by a lawyer. They presented medical documentation that supposedly certified you were suffering from severe cognitive decline and requested access to your bank statements." "And what did you do?" I asked, containing my outrage. "Fortunately, our protocol requires that these types of requests be processed exclusively by the Central Legal Department, which takes at least 15 business days, Linda replied. Additionally, I requested to speak with you personally before proceeding with any changes to your account. But your son insisted it was impossible due to your mental state. George took detailed notes of this information and requested copies of all the documents Daniel had presented. When we reviewed them, we discovered something extraordinary. The medical certificates were forged, but not by Daniel directly, but by his colleague, Dr. Theodore Vasquez, who had apparently been paid to create fraudulent medical documentation. This considerably broadens the scope of the conspiracy, George observed. Now we have evidence that other medical professionals are involved in forging official documents. Over the next few days, while I continued to feign mental confusion in front of my family, I worked intensively with my legal team to strengthen our case. Ethan, my investigator, had managed to discreetly contact some of the victims of Daniel's medical fraud, and their testimonies were devastating. One of the victims, Mrs. Hope Cortez, a 74-year-old woman, told me her experience through a video conference that George arranged in his office. Dr. Miller convinced me that I needed urgent heart surgery, Mrs. Cortez explained with a trembling voice. He told me that without the operation, I would die in less than 3 months. I paid $45,000 for a procedure that, as we later discovered, was completely unnecessary. My heart was perfectly healthy. Mrs. Cortez's case was particularly serious because Daniel had falsified her cardiac test results to justify the unnecessary surgery. He had altered electrocardiograms, manipulated echocardiograms, and had bribed lab technicians to provide falsified blood analyses. But the worst part, Mrs. Cortez continued, is that during the unnecessary operation, Dr. Miller damaged an artery that was perfectly healthy. Now I have real heart problems that I didn't have before I met him. My family is financially ruined, and my health is destroyed because of his greed. When the video conference ended, I sat in silence for several minutes. I couldn't believe that the son I had raised with so much love and dedication was capable of causing so much suffering to innocent people. But the most disturbing realization was that I had inadvertently funded his entire medical education and had helped create this monster. George pulled me out of my thoughts with a proposal that would completely change the course of our strategy. "Michael," he said with determination, "I think the time has come to set a trap for your son and daughter-in-law. We have enough evidence to proceed legally, but if we can get them to incriminate themselves even further, we can secure much harsher sentences and prevent them from manipulating the judicial system with their contacts." The trap that George proposed was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential implications. George's plan was as ingenious as it was dangerous. The idea was to organize a family meeting where I would pretend to be completely mentally lost, creating the perfect opportunity for Daniel and Jessica to reveal all their plans in front of hidden witnesses and professional recording equipment. "We are going to simulate that you want to make urgent changes to your will," George explained during our planning. "We'll tell them that you are confused about your properties and want to distribute everything before you die. This will force them to show their true nature and commit themselves further with incriminating statements. To execute this strategy, we needed the collaboration of our trusted lawyer, Mr. Aguirre, who had already demonstrated his integrity by stopping the previous fraudulent transfers. He agreed to participate after learning all the details of the conspiracy against me. "Michael," Mr. Aguirre assured me, "as a lawyer, I have seen many cases of abuse against the elderly, but never something so elaborate and cruel as this. It will be an honor to help you unmask these criminals." The following Wednesday, I called Daniel from my landline, making sure to sound confused and vulnerable. "My son," I said with an artificially trembling voice, "I need to see you urgently. I'm very worried about my things, about the money, about everything. I think I'm going to die soon, and I don't know what to do with my properties. Daniel responded with a false concern that I found nauseating after knowing his true intentions. "Dad, calm down," he said in a condescending tone. "Jessica and I will come over tomorrow afternoon to talk with you. Don't worry about anything. We'll take care of everything. But I don't remember where I have the important papers." I continued my act. "Sometimes I forget things, son. Do you think something serious is happening to my mind?" "It's normal at your age, Dad," Daniel replied, and I could detect a note of satisfaction in his voice. "That's why it's important that you settle all your affairs while you still can. Don't worry. We'll sort it all out tomorrow." That night, George and his team discreetly installed audio and video recording equipment in my main living room. They used tiny cameras hidden in picture frames, decorative plants even in the wall clock I had inherited from my father. The microphones were so small they were completely invisible but captured conversations with professional quality. "Remember, Michael," George instructed me, "you must appear confused but not completely incoherent. We want them to believe you can make decisions about your will, but that you're deteriorated enough to be easily manipulated." On Thursday at 4 in the afternoon, Daniel and Jessica arrived punctually at my apartment. I greeted them in my pajamas and robe with my hair disheveled, acting as if I had trouble recognizing them at first. "Daniel, is that you, son?" I asked, feigning confusion. "Oh, yes. And you are?" "What's your name?" "Oh, Jessica, of course." "Forgive me, sometimes I forget things." Jessica exchanged a significant look with Daniel. It was clear they interpreted my behavior as confirmation that my mental decline had advanced considerably since our last conversation. "Dad," Daniel said, sitting next to me on the couch, "you told us you wanted to talk about your properties and your money. What exactly is worrying you?" "I just don't know where the papers are," I replied, acting nervous. "I have a lot of money in the bank, right? And I have houses too. But I don't remember how many or where they are. I'm afraid that when I die, everything will be lost." Jessica leaned forward with a seemingly sympathetic expression, but I could see the greed shining in her eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said, in a honeyed voice, "don't you worry about that. Daniel and I can help you organize everything. Why don't you tell us what properties you remember having?" For the next hour, I pretended to be confused about my assets, while they tried to pry detailed information from me. I deliberately mentioned incorrect figures, wrong dates, and imprecise locations for my properties. Every mistake I made seemed to reassure them, more convincing them that I was truly losing my mental faculties. "Dad," Daniel finally said, "I think it would be a good idea for you to sign some documents to make sure everything is in order. Jessica can prepare the necessary papers so you don't have to worry about these things anymore." "What kind of documents?" I asked, feigning naivety. "Well," Jessica replied carefully, "we could draw up a general power of attorney so Daniel can manage your bank accounts and pay your bills. It would also be wise to transfer the properties to his name to avoid problems with the IRS when the time comes." "You mean when I die?" I asked directly. "Exactly," Daniel confirmed without showing any emotion. "It's the smartest thing you can do now while you're still relatively lucid." What they said next exceeded all my expectations. Believing I was completely vulnerable and manipulable, they began to reveal specific details of their plans that I had never heard before. "Look, Dad," Daniel said with chilling cruelty. "The truth is, Jessica and I have been preparing all of this for months. We knew that sooner or later your mind would start to fail, and we needed to be ready." "Daniel is right," Jessica added. "We've consulted with several specialists, and they all agree that the best thing for you is for someone younger and more capable to handle your financial affairs. But I can still think, I protested weakly. I'm not crazy. Daniel laughed with a coldness that froze my blood. Dad, last week you asked me the same question 3 times in 5 minutes. Yesterday you called Jessica by my mother's name, and she died 15 years ago. And right now you don't remember where you keep your important documents. Do you really think you're fit to manage $800,000? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, and with every word they spoke, Daniel and Jessica sank deeper into their own lies and revealed the true extent of their conspiracy. What shocked me the most was discovering that they had even involved my granddaughter Sarah in their manipulative plans. "And what are we going to do about Sarah?" Jessica asked, looking toward the door, as if fearing the teenager might appear at any moment. "Sarah won't be a problem," Daniel replied with total coldness. "We'll tell her that her grandfather is sick and needs special care. Once we have legal control of everything, we'll send her to study in London with my sister Linda. Far from here, far from uncomfortable questions." "But won't she suspect something when she sees that her grandfather no longer lives in his apartment?" Jessica insisted. "By the time she realizes, it will be too late," Daniel replied, shrugging. "Besides, Sarah is a kid. What can she do against 2 adults with university degrees and legal contacts?" Hearing how they planned to manipulate and send away my granddaughter, the only person in the family who truly loved me, was the moment I decided I had heard enough. It was time to reveal my winning hand. I stood up slowly, pretending to need the arm of the sofa for support, and walked to my desk where I kept some important documents. Daniel and Jessica watched me attentively, probably expecting another episode of confusion. "Son," I said, turning to them, "there's something I need to show you before I sign any documents." "What is it, Dad?" Daniel asked, with poorly disguised impatience. Instead of answering immediately, I took out my cell phone and dialed a number I had memorized. The call connected on the first ring. "George," I said clearly into the phone, "you can come up with Mr. Aguirre now. We have everything we need." The expression on Daniel and Jessica's faces changed instantly, from condescending confidence to total confusion, and then to gradual horror as they began to understand what was happening. "Dad," Daniel stammered, "what are you talking about?" "Who is George?" Instead of answering, I went to the window and opened the curtains that had been closed during our entire conversation. The evening light flooded the living room, revealing for the first time the tiny cameras that had been recording every second of our meeting. "See that camera behind your grandmother's portrait, Daniel?" I said, pointing to the wall. "And that other one in the corner plant? And the microphone hidden in the clock I inherited from my father?" Jessica shot up from the sofa, her face completely pale. "What does this mean, Michael?" she asked with a trembling voice. "It means, dear Jessica," I replied with a calm that surprised even myself, "that for the last 90 minutes you have confessed on professional cameras to all the crimes you have committed against me and plan to commit in the future." At that moment, footsteps were heard in the hallway and the front door opened. George entered, accompanied by Mr. Aguirre, my lawyer's associate, and 2 other people Daniel and Jessica did not immediately recognize. "Good afternoon," George said, addressing my son and daughter-in-law. "I am George Farrer Michael's attorney, and these are Inspector Davis of the police department and Prosecutor Torres." The silence that followed this introduction was deafening. Daniel and Jessica stood completely still like salt statues as they processed the magnitude of the trap they had fallen into. "Inspector," Daniel finally mumbled. "Prosecutor, I don't understand what's happening here." Inspector Davis approached them, showing his official identification. Daniel Miller and Mrs. Jessica Miller. You are under investigation for multiple crimes, including document forgery, attempted aggravated fraud conspiracy to commit fraud, and in Dr. Miller's case also for medical malpractice and serious injury against multiple patients. "This is ridiculous," Jessica shouted, partially regaining her composure. "We haven't done anything illegal. We were simply trying to help an old man who is clearly losing his mind." "Really?" Prosecutor Torres intervened with a cold smile. "Then, can you explain why you attempted to forge Mr. Miller's signature on property transfer documents, and why Dr. Miller submitted falsified medical certificates to 3 different banks claiming his father suffered from senile dementia when that is clearly not the case?" Daniel finally found his voice, but the words that came out of his mouth only worsened his situation. "How can you accuse me of forging medical certificates?" he protested. "I am a cardiovascular surgeon with 30 years of experience. I better than anyone can assess the mental state of my own father." "That is precisely why your actions are so serious," the prosecutor replied. "A doctor who uses his professional position to commit fraud against his own family and innocent patients deserves the most severe penalties our laws provide." George came over to me and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Michael," he said, "are you ready to tell these authorities everything you have discovered about the criminal activities of your son and daughter-in-law?" I looked directly into the eyes of Daniel, the son I had raised with so much love and dedication, the man who had denied me his blood when I was dying, and who had planned to steal everything I had worked for decades to build. "Inspector," I said, with a firm, clear voice, "I have a lot to tell you." For the next 2 hours, my living room turned into a makeshift interrogation room, where I meticulously revealed all the information I had gathered over weeks of investigation. Inspector Davis took detailed statements while Prosecutor Torres reviewed every document, every recording, and every piece of evidence we had prepared. "I'll start at the beginning," I told the authorities as Daniel and Jessica sat in complete silence. "On October 23rd, my son denied me a blood transfusion that could have saved my life, telling me verbatim, 'I would rather die than save a failure like you.' All of this was recorded on my personal device." George played the recording from the hospital on the audio equipment we had set up. Hearing those cruel words again, but this time in front of judicial authorities, gave me a satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. "But that was just the beginning," I continued. "I later discovered that my son and daughter-in-law had been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my entire estate and pay off the enormous debts Daniel had accumulated from medical malpractice lawsuits." Prosecutor Torres interrupted my story to address Daniel directly. "Dr. Miller," she said in a stern tone, "our preliminary investigations have confirmed that you are facing at least 6 civil lawsuits for a total of $540,000 in settlements. Is this correct?" Daniel exchanged a desperate look with Jessica before answering. "Prosecutor, those lawsuits are completely baseless," he lied shamelessly. "They are disgruntled patients looking for easy money by suing successful doctors. My professional insurance will take care of everything." "Your professional insurance," the prosecutor replied with a sardonic smile. "According to our records, your insurance policy was canceled 8 months ago for non-payment of premiums. Furthermore, we have testimonies from at least 4 victims confirming that you performed completely unnecessary medical procedures on them." Inspector Davis took a bulky folder from his briefcase and began reading specific names and dates. "Hope Cortez unnecessary heart surgery, $45,000. Richard Navarro, fraudulent spine operation, $38,000. Linda Lopez, removal of a healthy gallbladder, $22,000. Shall I continue, Dr. Miller?" With each name the inspector mentioned, Daniel grew paler. It was obvious he didn't expect the authorities to have such detailed information about his victims. "But there's more," I continued. "During my recovery in the hospital, I overheard a conversation between Daniel and Jessica, where they planned to fraudulently commit me to a nursing home and forge medical documents to declare me incompetent. George then played the recordings I had obtained at the hospital, where Daniel and Jessica's voices could be clearly heard discussing their criminal plans. The audio quality was perfect, and every word was unmistakable. When the playback finished, Jessica finally lost the composure she had maintained until then. "This is an elaborate trap," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "A vengeful old man is making up false accusations against his own family. Michael never had cameras in his house. This is all a farce." Prosecutor Torres looked at her with an expression that could have frozen lava. "Mrs. Miller," she said in an icy voice, "are you suggesting that Mr. Miller forged the recordings where you confessed to multiple crimes? Are you implying he hired actors to imitate your voices with perfect precision? Or perhaps you think he bribed multiple victims of your husband's medical fraud to lie to the authorities?" Inspector Davis then approached Jessica and showed her another set of documents. "Furthermore, Mrs. Miller, we have evidence that you as a lawyer actively participated in the forgery of medical certificates and the attempted fraudulent transfer of properties. The State Bar Association has already opened a disciplinary file against you." "What medical certificates?" Jessica asked, trying to sound innocent, but her trembling voice betrayed her completely. "The certificates signed by Dr. Theodore Vasquez, stating that Mr. Miller suffered from severe senile dementia," the inspector replied. "Certificates that you presented at 3 different banking institutions trying to gain access to your father-in-law's accounts." George then intervened with information that was the final blow for Jessica. "Inspector," my lawyer said, "we have also discovered that Mrs. Miller diverted money from her own client's trust accounts to pay for her husband's legal defense. This constitutes aggravated embezzlement." The color drained completely from Jessica's face. It was clear she didn't know we had discovered that information as well. Daniel, seeing that the situation was completely hopeless, tried one last desperate strategy. "Dad," he said in a pleading voice, "this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Yes, it's true I have financial problems, but I never really wanted to hurt you. I was just desperate. If you drop all the charges, I promise to pay back every dollar I tried to take." His pathetic plea filled me with a mixture of pity and disgust. This was the same man who had denied me his blood when I was dying, who had planned to steal everything I owned, and who had caused unspeakable suffering to innocent patients. "Daniel," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "when you denied me your blood in the hospital, you forever destroyed any possibility of reconciliation between us. A father can forgive many things, but he can never forget when his own son would rather see him die than help him." Prosecutor Torres then addressed them both in an official tone. "Dr. Daniel Miller and Mrs. Jessica Miller, you are formally charged with conspiracy to commit aggravated fraud forgery of official documents, and in Dr. Miller's case also with medical malpractice resulting in serious injury. You have the right to remain silent and to contact a defense attorney." Inspector Davis approached them with handcuffs ready. "Furthermore," he added, "you are being detained until the bail hearing which will take place next Monday." As I watched my son and daughter-in-law being handcuffed, I felt a strange mixture of justice served and profound sadness. I had won this battle, but I had lost my family forever. After the authorities took Daniel and Jessica away in handcuffs, a strange and heavy silence fell over my apartment. George, Mr. Aguirre, and I were left alone, surrounded by the recording equipment that had captured the most devastating confession I had ever witnessed. "Michael," George said, putting the documents in his briefcase. The hardest part is over. Now we must prepare for the legal consequences that will come in the following days and weeks. Over the next 3 days, the media picked up the story of the arrest of a prestigious cardiovascular surgeon and his lawyer wife for family fraud and medical malpractice. The newspaper headlines were devastating. Doctor denies transfusion to dying father. Surgeon scams elderly patients with unnecessary operations. Lawyer steals client money to defend criminal husband. On Saturday morning, I received a call that completely surprised me. It was my granddaughter Sarah, who had been spending the weekend at her best friend's house when her parents were arrested. "Grandpa," she said with a trembling voice, "I just found out about everything from the news. Is what they're saying about Mom and Dad true?" The conversation with Sarah was one of the most difficult of my life. How do you explain to a 16-year-old girl that her parents were criminals who had tried to rob their own grandfather? How do you tell her that her father had denied me a blood transfusion that could have saved my life? "Sarah, honey," I said, choosing my words carefully, "your father and mother made very serious mistakes, but I want you to know that none of this is your fault, and that I will always love you no matter what." "Can I come see you, Grandpa?" she asked with a broken voice. "I don't have anyone else now." "Of course, my love," I replied immediately. "This will always be your home." When Sarah arrived that afternoon, she had a small suitcase and eyes swollen from crying. I hugged her for several minutes without saying anything, feeling her small body tremble against mine. "Grandpa," she finally whispered, "why did Dad do those terrible things to you? I always thought he loved you." That question forced me to reflect deeply on the mistakes I might have made as a father. I had spoiled Daniel, giving him everything without teaching him the value of hard work and sacrifice. I had been too permissive when he showed the first signs of selfishness and lack of empathy. "Sarah," I finally said, "sometimes people change in ways we can't understand or predict. Your father was overcome by greed and lost sight of what really matters in life." During that week, as Daniel and Jessica remained in custody awaiting their court hearing, the first consequences of their actions began to unfold. The San Carlos Clinical Hospital immediately suspended Daniel's medical license and launched an internal investigation into all the surgical procedures he had performed over the last 2 years. On Tuesday, Dr. Richard Herrera, the hospital's medical director, called me personally to apologize for not detecting the irregularities in my son's professional behavior sooner. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Herrera said, "I want to express our sincerest apologies. As a medical institution, we failed by not supervising Dr. Daniel Miller's activities more strictly. We are reviewing all of his cases and contacting every patient who may have been affected." That same week, the city's medical board officially announced Daniel's expulsion from the professional organization, meaning he could never again practice medicine in the country. The decision was unanimous and was based not only on the fraud against patients, but also on the violation of the Hippocratic Oath by denying medical assistance to his own father. In parallel, the Bar Association immediately suspended Jessica's professional license and froze all her law firm's accounts after confirming she had diverted client funds for personal use. On Friday of that week, George informed me about the first judicial decisions related to the case. "Michael," he said during our meeting in his office, "the prosecutor has decided to seek prison sentences of 6 to 8 years for Daniel for the crimes of aggravated fraud, document forgery, and medical malpractice. For Jessica, she's asking for 4 to 6 years for complicity in fraud and embezzlement." "And what are their chances of avoiding prison?" I asked. "Very slim," George replied categorically. "The evidence is overwhelming. They have multiple victims willing to testify, and the crimes are perfectly documented on audio and video recordings. Besides, the case has received a lot of media attention, which makes it unlikely that the judges will be lenient. During those days, I also received calls from some of the victims of Daniel's medical frauds. Mrs. Hope Cortez, the elderly woman who had undergone unnecessary heart surgery, contacted me to thank me for reporting my son. "Mr. Miller," she said with an emotional voice, "I know how difficult it must have been for you to report your own son. But thanks to your courage, my family and I will finally get justice. Your son stole my life savings and nearly killed me with an operation I didn't need." These conversations with Daniel's victims helped me confirm that I had made the right decision, no matter how personally painful it was. On Sunday evening, while I was having a quiet dinner with Sarah in my apartment, the phone rang. It was a call from the prison. Daniel had earned his right to a phone call and had decided to contact me. "Dad?" I heard his broken voice through the receiver. "Please, I need to talk to you, please." Sarah looked at me with questioning eyes, waiting to see my reaction. After several seconds of silence, I made the decision that would definitively mark the future of our relationship. "Daniel," I said in a firm but calm voice, "you have 5 minutes to say what you have to say." "Dad," Daniel began, with a voice I had never heard before, broken by sobs and desperation. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I never wanted things to go this far. Everything got out of control." Sarah came closer to me, and I could see tears streaming down her cheeks as she listened to her father plead from prison. I gestured for her to sit next to me because this conversation would affect her directly too. "Daniel," I replied, maintaining a neutral tone, "you had multiple opportunities to tell me the truth about your financial problems. You could have come to me as a son should to his father when he needs help. Instead, you chose to lie to steal, and when I needed you most, you denied me something as basic as a blood transfusion." "I know, Dad. I know," Daniel sobbed. "I was desperate. The lawsuits, the debts, the pressure. Jessica convinced me it was the only way to save our future, but I never really meant to hurt you." "You never meant to hurt me," I repeated with a bitterness I couldn't contain. "Daniel, you literally told me you would rather see me die than save my life. How can you now say you didn't want to hurt me?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. When Daniel spoke again, his voice sounded even more desperate. "Dad, I was out of my mind. The pressure, the problems, everything. I said things I didn't really mean. Please, you have to believe me. I'm your son, I'm your flesh and blood." "That's precisely why it hurts so much," Ipashaim replied. "Because you are my son, because I gave you everything I had, because I believed in you when no one else did, and you chose to betray me in the cruelest way possible." Sarah took my hand and whispered, "Grandpa, maybe Dad really is sorry." Daniel must have heard his daughter's comment, because he immediately addressed her. "Sarah, are you there, sweetheart?" he asked with renewed hope in his voice. "Sarah, tell your grandfather this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Tell him your dad isn't the monster they think he is." "Daniel," I interrupted him firmly, "do not involve Sarah in this conversation. She has nothing to do with the decisions you made as an adult." "But Dad," Daniel insisted, "Sarah is my daughter. She has a right to know that her father made mistakes, but that he's not a criminal like the media is portraying me." "You're not a criminal?" I asked in disbelief. "Daniel, you performed unnecessary operations on elderly patients, stole their life savings, forged medical documents, tried to steal my estate, and you denied me a transfusion, that could have saved my life. If that doesn't make you a criminal, then I don't know what does." The conversation was interrupted by a background voice telling Daniel his call time was ending. "Dad, please," he shouted desperately. "I can't go to prison. I won't survive there. Jessica is already talking to her lawyer about a possible deal with the prosecutor's office. If you drop the charges, maybe we can work something out." "Work something out," I repeated bitterly. "Daniel, do you really think that after everything you've done, after all the lives you've ruined, you can just work things out?" "I can pay back the money," he exclaimed. "I can compensate all the patients. I can do community service, whatever it takes." "With what money are you going to compensate anyone?" I asked him. "According to my investigations, you owe over $500,000 in settlements. Your accounts are frozen, your medical license has been permanently revoked, and your wife has also lost her professional license. Where exactly do you plan on getting money to compensate anyone?" The silence that followed my question was revealing. It was clear Daniel hadn't really thought about the practical consequences of his actions. "Dad," he finally whispered, "if you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything. My career, my freedom, my family, everything I've worked for 40 years is going to be destroyed." "Daniel," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "you already lost all of that the moment you decided to put your greed before your honor. I didn't destroy your career, you destroyed it by performing unnecessary operations on innocent patients. I didn't ruin your marriage. You ruined it by involving Jessica in your criminal schemes. And I definitely did not end our father-son relationship. You ended it when you denied me your blood as I bled out on a hospital gurney." The background voice interrupted again, indicating the call had to end immediately. "Dad, please." Daniel cried out one last time. "Don't abandon me. I'm your only son." "Daniel," I said, with a finality that surprised even Sarah. "I had a son named Daniel Miller. He was a doctor married to a lawyer and had a beautiful daughter named Sarah. But that son died for me the day he looked me in the eye and told me he'd rather see me die than help me. The man speaking to me from prison is a stranger who shares his name and face, but he is not my son." I hung up the phone before he could reply. Sarah looked at me with a mixture of awe and sadness. "Grandpa," she said softly, "are you really not going to help Dad?" "My love," I replied, taking her hands in mine. "Helping your father now would be the worst possible thing for him. If I let him avoid the consequences of his actions, he will never truly learn what he has done wrong. And more importantly, his victims will never get the justice they deserve." That night, while Sarah slept in the guest room I had specially prepared for her, I received another unexpected call. This time it was from Jessica, who had apparently also earned her call from the women's prison where she was being held. "Mr. Miller." I heard Jessica's voice through the receiver, noticeably different from her usual tone of professional confidence. Now it sounded broken, desperate, completely defeated. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after everything that has happened, but I need to talk to you about Sarah." I was surprised that Jessica chose to start the conversation by talking about her daughter instead of pleading for her own freedom as Daniel had. "What about Sarah?" I asked, maintaining a cautious tone. "She has no one else but you now." Jessica continued, and I could detect genuine tears in her voice. "My sister in Florida can't take care of a teenager, and Daniel's parents died years ago. Please don't let Sarah pay for our mistakes." "Jessica," I replied firmly, "Sarah will always have a home with me. She is my granddaughter, and I love her unconditionally, but I can't say the same about you or Daniel." I know, Jessica murmured. Mr. Miller, I want you to know that this all started as a desperate idea when Daniel's financial problems became unbearable. I never imagined we would go this far, that we would do so much harm. A desperate idea, I repeated in disbelief. Jessica, you two planned for months to steal my estate. You forged medical documents, lied to financial institutions, and even involved corrupt doctors in your conspiracy. That isn't desperation, it's an organized criminal enterprise. The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds before Jessica spoke again, this time with a brutal honesty that caught me completely off guard. You're right, she admitted. Mr. Miller, during these days in prison, I've had time to reflect on everything we did, and I've realized something terrible. At some point, I stopped being a lawyer and became an accomplice to a con man. I helped Daniel steal from innocent patients. I stole money from my own clients, and we conspired to steal everything you had worked for decades to build from you. Her confession left me momentarily speechless. It was the first time either of them had fully admitted the magnitude of their crimes without excuses or justifications. Why are you telling me this now, Jessica? I finally asked. Because I want you to know that I completely understand why you reported us, she replied. And because I need you to know that whatever happens to me, Sarah had absolutely nothing to do with any of our crimes. She didn't even suspect we were having financial problems. Over the next few minutes, Jessica revealed additional details about the extent of their criminal activities that even my investigations hadn't uncovered. She told me about other doctors who had been involved in the unnecessary surgery scheme, about additional patients who had been scammed, and about the network of corrupt lawyers who had facilitated the document forgeries. Mr. Miller, Jessica continued, my defense attorney has explained that I will face between 4 and 6 years of effective prison time. There is no way to avoid it with all the evidence you gathered. But I want to ask you a favor that has nothing to do with me or Daniel. What favor? I asked, curious. Please do not let Sarah visit me in prison for the first few years of my sentence, she said with a determination I didn't expect. A teenager shouldn't see her mother in that environment. I want her to remember the successful lawyer I was before, not the criminal I became. This request impacted me deeply. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Jessica was showing genuine maternal concern above her own interests. Are you sure about that, Jessica? I asked. Sarah might need to talk to you, especially during the first few months, as she adjusts to this new reality. I am completely sure, she replied with conviction. Mr. Miller, Sarah is a brilliant young woman with a promising future. You can't let her parents' mistakes define the rest of her life. She needs stability education, and above all, she needs the example of honorable people like you. The conversation was interrupted by the notice that the call time was ending, but Jessica had something more to say. Mr. Miller, she said quickly, there's something else you should know. Daniel is considering pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. His lawyer told him that with a full confession and cooperation with the authorities, he could get out in 3 or 4 years instead of 8. And what are you going to do? I asked. I'm going to follow my lawyer's advice and also plead guilty, she replied. There's no point in prolonging this process with a long trial that would only cause more pain to Sarah and more suffering to the victims of our crimes. After hanging up, I sat in silence for several minutes, reflecting on the 2 conversations I'd had that night. Daniel had called seeking pity and trying to avoid the consequences of his actions. Jessica had called to take full responsibility and to protect the well-being of her daughter. The next day, George visited me with news about the latest legal developments. Mr. Miller, he informed me, both Daniel and Jessica have decided to plead guilty to all charges. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. What does this mean in practical terms? I asked. It means Daniel will likely receive a sentence of 4 years of effective prison time, and Jessica will receive 3 years, George explained. Additionally, both will have to pay full restitution to all their victims, which will leave them completely bankrupt for the rest of their lives. That same week, the medical board issued an official statement permanently expelling Daniel from the medical profession and recommending that his case be studied in medical schools as an example of an extreme violation of medical ethics. On Friday afternoon, as I was helping Sarah with her homework, I reflected on how a family that seemed perfect from the outside had completely collapsed in a matter of weeks. But I also realized that in a way I had gained something invaluable: a closer, more honest relationship with my granddaughter, and the confirmation that I had instilled the right values even if my son had chosen to abandon them. "Grandpa," Sarah said, as she closed her books, "do you think I'll ever be able to forgive my parents for everything they did?" "My love," I replied, hugging her. "Forgiveness isn't something you should feel obligated to give. It's something that will come naturally when you're ready, if you ever are. In the meantime, let's focus on building your future." 3 years have passed since that terrible day in the hospital when my son denied me the transfusion that could have saved my life. As I write these words at my desk, looking out at the autumn cityscape through my window, I can say that the most painful decision of my life also turned out to be the most correct one. Daniel served exactly 4 years in the state prison. He got out last March a completely different person, gaunt, prematurely aged, and stripped of all the arrogance that had characterized his personality for decades. Prison had broken not only his body, but also the inflated ego that had led him to commit so many crimes. During his time in prison, I never visited him. I kept my word to consider him a stranger who simply shared my late son's last name. However, through George, my lawyer, I stayed informed about his situation. Daniel worked in the prison library, completed several rehabilitation programs, and according to the prison reports, showed genuine remorse for his actions. Jessica was released from prison 6 months before Daniel, after serving 2.5 years of her sentence. Unlike her husband, she kept the promise she had made to me during that phone call from jail. She never tried to contact Sarah during her incarceration, thus protecting her daughter from the trauma of seeing her in that degrading environment. When Daniel regained his freedom, he tried to rebuild his life from scratch in the humblest way possible. With no medical license, no assets, and a criminal record that will follow him forever. He got a job as a clerk in a pharmacy in a working-class neighborhood. The owner, an elderly man who knew his story, decided to give him a chance after Daniel honestly confessed the whole truth about his past. George told me during one of our regular meetings, "Your son is living in a one-room apartment near his job, earning minimum wage, walking to work to save on public transport, and according to my sources, he hasn't tried to contact any of his former medical colleagues." Daniel's transformation was complete from a prestigious cardiovascular surgeon to a pharmacy clerk, from living in a mansion in a gated community to inhabiting a tiny studio in one of the city's humblest neighborhoods, from handling hundreds of thousands of dollars to surviving on less than $1,000 a month. Jessica followed a similar, though slightly different path. She permanently lost her license to practice law, but got a job as an administrative assistant at a veterinary clinic. She lives alone in a rented apartment in a suburb, and from what information I've been able to gather, maintains an extremely low profile, avoiding any contact with her former professional circles. What has surprised me most is that Daniel and Jessica divorced during their time in prison. Apparently, the pressure of facing the consequences of their crimes completely destroyed their marriage. They now live separate lives, united only by the pain of having lost custody of their daughter and the regret for the decisions they made. Sarah, now 19, has grown into an extraordinary young woman. She graduated high school with excellent grades and is currently studying medicine at the same university where her father graduated decades ago. But unlike Daniel, Sarah has chosen to specialize in community medicine, with the goal of working in underserved areas to help people who cannot afford private health care. "Grandpa," she told me a few weeks ago during one of our weekly family dinners, "I want to be the kind of doctor my father should have been, but never was. I want to dedicate my career to healing, not to getting rich." The irony of the situation is not lost on me. The son who betrayed me in the cruelest way possible has indirectly given me the most wonderful granddaughter I could have hoped for. Sarah has inherited her father's intelligence, but she has also developed the compassion and integrity that he lost somewhere along the way. Over these 3 years, I have kept in regular contact with several of the victims of Daniel's medical frauds. Mrs. Hope Cortez, the elderly woman who was subjected to the unnecessary heart surgery, fully recovered from the complications caused by the fraudulent operation. With part of the money she recovered through the settlements, she established a small foundation that helps seniors identify and report medical scams. "Mr. Miller," Mrs. Cortez told me during our last phone call, "what your son did to me was terrible, but your courage in reporting him saved many other people from suffering the same fate. For that, I will always be grateful." The San Carlos Clinical Hospital implemented new medical supervision protocols as a direct result of the scandal caused by Daniel. Now, all non-urgent surgical procedures require a mandatory second opinion, and there is a monitoring system that tracks doctors' behavioral patterns to detect possible irregularities. As for my health, I have fully recovered from the hemorrhage that almost cost me my life 3 years ago. Ironically, the emotional stress of discovering my son's betrayal and the process of bringing him to justice gave me a new energy and purpose in life. At 71, I feel more vital and mentally sharp than I have in years. I have decided to use my experience to help other seniors who might be victims of family or financial abuse. I volunteer with an organization that specializes in detecting and preventing these types of crimes, sharing my story as an example that it is possible to fight back and get justice regardless of age or circumstances. 2 months ago, Daniel finally tried to contact me through a letter he sent via George. In it, he asked for forgiveness once again and expressed his desire to be a part of my life again, even in a very limited way. The letter was handwritten with a shaky script that reflected his emotional state, and each paragraph conveyed a remorse that seemed genuine. After reading the letter several times and discussing it with Sarah, I decided to reply. I wrote him a short letter explaining that while I could understand his remorse, the wounds he had caused were too deep to ever fully heal. I wished him good luck in his new life, but made it clear that our father-son relationship had definitively ended the day he denied me his blood in the hospital. "The person who wrote this letter may be a good man now," I explained to Sarah after sending my response. "But he is no longer my son. My son died the day he decided his selfishness was more important than his father's life." As I finish writing this story, I reflect on the lessons I have learned during these extraordinary years. I have discovered that justice, though painful to obtain, is essential for healing the deepest wounds. I have learned that age is not a barrier to defending oneself from those who try to take advantage of us, and more importantly, I have confirmed that genuine family ties are based on love and mutual respect, not simply on shared blood. My granddaughter Sarah represents the very best of what a family can be. Unconditional love, mutual support, and shared values that transcend difficulties. She is my true heir, not only to my material estate, but to the principles and dignity I have tried to uphold throughout my life. The story of my son Daniel serves as a warning to all who believe they can betray family trust without consequences. But it is also a story of hope, because it shows that it is never too late to stand up for what is right, no matter how painful the process may be. If you enjoyed this story, support us with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your opinions in the comments.